Everybody keeps saying that the red heifers are needed for this. The red heifers are needed for that. Listen to me. The red heifers are not needed for the Temple Mount, for the tabernacle, for the articles therein, or the priesthood. Let me show you why. Hey, this is Off the Cuff, and I'm Steve from TorahFamily.org. I briefly discussed this in our last World News Update, but yet I still keep seeing people making new videos on how the red heifer sacrifice is needed for the Temple Mount. I see Christian channels, mainstream media, and even Glenn Beck covered it and saying how it has to take place. But the red heifer sacrifice has nothing to do with reinstituting temple sacrifices. Nothing. So many people keep regurgitating and parroting the same false information and saying the ashes of the red heifer is needed for cleansing the tabernacle or temple or its location, along with all the articles and utensils of the tabernacle. But that's not true. Please, stop listening to people who keep saying this. Yes, the red heifer sacrifice is noted in Numbers chapter 19. Yes, the sacrifice is to be done away from the temple. But the ashes from that sacrifice has nothing to do with cleansing the temple or anything in it. In fact, the only thing from that sacrifice used on the tabernacle or the temple is the blood from the red heifer, as stated here in Numbers chapter 19, verse 4. It says, "Then Eleazar the priest is to take some of its blood on his finger and sprinkle it 7 times toward the front of the tent of meeting." That's it. Nothing else. This is what people read for the red heifer being for the temple. Numbers chapter 19, verse 18. "Then a man who is ceremonially clean is to take some hyssop, dip it in the water, and sprinkle the tent and all the furnishings and the people who are there." Then they say, see, there it is. The ashes are to purify the tent of meeting and everything in it. But it doesn't say tent of meeting. So let's read the whole context. Starting in Numbers chapter 19, verse 14. "This is the law that applies when a person dies in a tent. Anyone who enters a tent and anyone who is in it will be unclean for 7 days. And every open container without a lid fastened on it will be unclean. Anyone out in the open who touches someone who has been killed with a sword, or someone who has died a natural death, or anyone who touches a human bone or a grave will be unclean for 7 days. For the unclean person, put some ashes from the burned purification offering into a jar and pour fresh water over them." Now the verse that everyone quotes, verse 18. "Then a man who is ceremonially clean is to take some hyssop, dip it in the water, and sprinkle the tent and all the furnishings and the people who were there." Now, let's read the rest of that verse that so many choose not to do. "He must also sprinkle anyone who has touched a human bone, or a grave, or someone who has been killed, or someone who has died a natural death. The man who is clean is to sprinkle the unclean person on the 3rd and 7th days, and on the 7th day he is to purify him. The person being cleansed must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and that evening he will be clean." As you can see, this has nothing to do with reinstituting the sacrificial system in the tabernacle or the temple. It has everything to do with being cleansed from either touching or being in the same tent of a dead person. Remember, this is Numbers chapter 19. They've been out of Egypt now for 1 full year. the tabernacle was set up back in Numbers chapter 7, just in time for the first Passover since the Passover in Egypt. So, the tabernacle was already set up, with the priest and sacrificial system already in place. Yahweh gave Moses the instructions to get it all set up and going back in Exodus chapter 29. That whole chapter is dedicated to those instructions. I encourage you to read that chapter to find out what the requirements were to get everything started. Again, it's Exodus chapter 29. But I'll tell you now, you won't find one thing among those instructions having anything to do with the red heifer. Not one. And at the end of that chapter, we read this. Exodus chapter 29, starting in verse 44. So I will consecrate the tent of meeting and the altar, and will consecrate Aaron and his sons to serve me as priests. Then I will dwell among the Israelites and be their God. They will know that I am Yahweh their God, who brought them out of Egypt, so that I might dwell among them. I am Yahweh their God. So, everything is made ready with absolutely no requirement of a red heifer. Not one. Please stop believing the misinformation that's being spread like wildfire regarding these red heifers. Please share this teaching just to get the truth out on this matter. Now, I know there will be some who'll ask, but Steve, it also says this offering is a sin offering. What do we do with that? For it says in the latter part of verse 19, they shall be kept by the Israelite community for use in the water of cleansing. It is for purification from sin. This is a great question. We must first understand, though, that touching a dead body or being in a room with a dead body is not a sin. What is a sin is going to the temple without being properly cleansed from that event. This is seen in Leviticus chapter 15, verse 31. So, if you plan on going to the temple, you have to stay separate from all that which makes you unclean. This is also seen here in Numbers chapter 5. Everyone who is unclean must be kept outside the camp so they don't make others unclean and defile the tabernacle. Then we see the second Passover given in Numbers chapter 9 for those who may be unclean because of a dead body. The second Passover is provided in the second month of the year. We have multiple teachings on second Passover, or that discusses the importance of it. We'll link all of these here below for those interested. But again, the point is, touching a dead body is not a sin. It's only a sin if you do not separate yourself when you are unclean because of it, as seen here in Numbers chapter 35, verse 34. Do not defile the land where you live and where I dwell, for I, Yahweh, dwell among the Israelites. Please note, this is a command. So, what we see in Numbers chapter 19, verse 9, is not saying it's a sacrifice for when you sin, but rather a sacrifice to keep you from sinning. A sacrifice provided to keep you from sinning. Just remember, the red heifer sacrifice has nothing to do with reinstituting the sacrificial system, or for the tabernacle or the temple. I know some will say, but Steve, the Jews say it has to happen, and they're making the plans to make it come to pass. And that's correct. But the mere fact they're using this for their defense and getting it all started should let you know this is not founded on the word of Yahweh, but rather in the traditions of man. Please consider our teachings, beware of the coming sacrifices, and what is the idol of jealousy. Please consider sharing this teaching to let people know the truth on this matter. As always, think about it, pray about it, But more than anything, be a doer of the word and not a hearer only. Until next time, Shalom.